Well, folks, once again, welcome back to my YouTube channel, Captain Boat Builder. Today is episode 9, and I'm calling it The Bottom, Fiberglass and Paint. Today I'll be showing you briefly how I fiberglassed the bottom of the boat, how I prepared it for the primer, the 3 incredibly long processes of using the high build primer, sanding it off, putting it on again, sanding it off. It did a great job at eliminating some of the irregularities in the bottom. I was a little bit disappointed that I couldn't get more of the what I call the wiggle out of the hull. And then now I have one finish coat on, so you can see how it's starting to look in full gloss. I would like to point out from the beginning here that I've been struggling with the seam, or I guess you'd call it the join, between the bottom panel and the bilge panel. As you look at the images here on the video, it'll be on the right side, but it's actually the port side of the boat. You'll see that there's some wiggling in it, and it's not a fair curve. It's not bad, but it's not what I had hoped for. The other side of the boat, for some reason, the curve is much more fair, and the joint, the connection between the bilge panels and the top sides has also produced a much more fair curve. I couldn't figure out why I had so much trouble with this, and thinking back, I think probably what happened is using the copper wire, I was able to put quite a bit of pressure on the joints. I wanted them to be nice and snug, and that's great, except I think I might have created my own problem, because if the curves are not quite fair with the cutting from the computer-controlled cutting machines, and you pull them too tight, that slight imperfection is going to show up. I think the hull would have come out much better if I hadn't wired it so tightly and just sort of gently massaged it into place and tightened the wires slowly, and as I say, not quite so tight, concentrating more on the fairness of the curves of the joint rather than an absolute super snug joint. That way the panels would have been able to slowly wiggle into shape, and I could have spent more time trying to get the curves fair. So you might try that. Yeah, you can always do it again, but try not snugging the panels up as tight as I did. Concentrate more on the fairness of the curves. So having said that, let's get right into it today. And again, this is the fiberglass and the paintwork on the bottom. At this point in the construction, I've got the hull sanded on the bottom. I've got all the seams filled with wood flour and resin. These are all the seams that didn't fill from the inside. I'll be sanding those tomorrow. I've got the transom squared off and looking pretty good. Don't know whether you can see it, but I've got some humps in the hull that I'm going to be trying to take care of with a longboard. I'm not quite sure what the problem was with stitching the hull together, but I did get a few wrinkles. I'll be doing the best that I can, but they're on the bottom, so only the fish will see them. Well, now I'm finally ready to do the fiberglassing. Finished with the sanding. I tried to do a little bit of fairing, tried to grind down some high spots and tried to smooth it out. I've got the cloth in place. I haven't rolled on the resin yet. I'll be doing that a little bit later. I wanted to show you here where I've got a little bit of wiggle in the hull, and I think you can see it here in this picture. It's especially on the port side here, especially obvious. And I'm not quite sure why I have these wrinkles in the hull, and this is not in the fiberglass, this is actually in the wood. I think part of the problem may be that I didn't stitch it evenly enough or pulled it too tight a little bit prematurely. I'm not sure. Maybe the edges of the panels needed to be worked on just a little bit. But as I said before, I've been trying to get this to even out. I'll probably do some fairing after I get the fiberglass finished with some compound, but again, only the fish can see it. Well, now you're looking at the first coat of resin on the fiberglass. Went on pretty well. I used a roller this time. Haven't used a roller in the past. Used a very fine roller, and it seems to lay the cloth down. I think it's actually easier than using a foam brush, or I should say a chip brush, which is what I used in the past. Got a nice bond all the way around. I think if you look, you can see some of the wiggle in the bottom line that I tried to get rid of, and I haven't been able to do it too well. Maybe a little fairing with the paint and some compound. You can see that the left side in the picture here is actually a much fairer curve than the right side. And again, I'm not sure why, but I'll be doing a lot more work on the hull and putting the floor supports in, and then the bottom will be almost finished. So folks, what we have here is the hull. This is after 3 coats of epoxy on top of the fiberglass. It's all been hand sanded, which took me forever. It seems like the hand sanding is a little more accurate than using power tools. You may see down here, there's an area where we've got some nice shiny resin. What I figured is that this is part of the low area that I have in the wiggle on this side of the boat. And I'm trying just building it up a little bit coat by coat with layers of epoxy, and then gently sanding down the high spots. This is probably right here is one of the worst high spots. So I'm trying to even out the curve. As you can see, I've got the hull reinforcement strips glued down to the hull, and they're coated with 4 coats of epoxy resin, and I'm about to finish the sanding on the boat probably tomorrow or the next day, and then I'll be on to 2 coats of the high build primer with more sanding. So we'll see what the results will be. I'm hoping for a nice smooth bottom. Back with you again now after quite a bit of sanding. This is the first coat of high build primer that's been completely sanded off. And when I say completely sanded, I've been using the longboard. Actually, it's the short longboard. I want to show you this again. This has been a great tool. And the reason this is such a good tool is that it gives you a long, flat surface. And what it does is when you're sanding, it allows you to effectively bridge the low areas, like right here. You can see this area. So when you're sanding here and you're sanding here, but you're not sanding so much there, so the buildup remains. So I've been using the longboard a lot. In many boat building yards, the longboards are much longer, maybe 2 or 3 men working on it at the same time. They refer to it as a torture board. And I can tell you after all this sanding, that's a good name. So again, here we've got the primer fully sanded, and all the white spots that you see, those are all low areas that are gradually filling up. This is the first coat. I was hoping that I could finish this with 2 and get it evened out, but I'm not sure. It might take 3. I wanted to show you right here. I'm actually doing this in almost ideal conditions. Here in the basement, it's 70 degrees, 35% humidity. I've had a fan on it for 3 days to dry the paint. Should be ideal conditions, and it was. Excellent sanding, mostly a nice, soft, white dust. Again, I'm still sticking with this Interlux pre-coat primer. You may remember earlier in the videos I had complained that it wasn't sanding dry and sort of a soft dust. It was kind of gummy. Excuse me. And what I found out was I just didn't wait long enough for it to dry. Even with perfect conditions for drying, I still waited 3 days. And if you're in a hurry to build a boat, that's not going to sound very good. You're going to have to find some other projects to do in those days, and it might just be wasted time. But this stuff does work if you wait long enough for it to dry nice and dry. So I'm going to put on another coat and sand that off, and we'll let you know how the fill is going. At the risk of boring you to death, I wanted to show you what the bottom looks like after I've completely sanded the second coat of primer. You can easily see the remaining low spots. Those are the white spots, of course. It's getting smoother and smoother, but I gotta tell you, I don't know. It's been a lot of work. I'm doing all the sanding by hand, and I'm doing it all with a block and also with the short long board. That's about the only way I can figure to even out the inconsistencies in the hull. There's still some pretty good ripples, and those are just in the plywood itself. But this is it after the second coat of primer completely painted. I'm getting ready to put on a third coat, and it may take 4. We'll see. Kind of looks like the result after the first coat, doesn't it? Well, now I'm just about at the end of this phase of the construction, complete with fiberglass on the bottom. The reinforcing strips are on the bottom. They're covered with epoxy, 3 coats of high build primer, a tremendous amount of sanding, and this is the first coat, this is the first finish coat of the full gloss 1-part polyurethane. I'm pleased with most of the surface. I'm going to be putting on another coat with some light sanding in between, and this will just be a temporary completion of the bottom, because eventually I'll be back painting the bottom again, probably with as many as 5 coats. That's what I used on my previous build. This particular paint is really nice paint to work with. It's very forgiving, gives you a nice slick finish, but it's relatively thin. I mean, you can see in places, you can see right through it. So I'll be putting on another coat, and then I'll be switching over to more work on the interior of the boat. I'll be turning the boat over and starting to finish out the interior. Then I'll go back to painting the exterior. So thanks again for watching. This completes the bottom of the hull, and in the next episode we'll have the boat flipped over again, and I'll be completing the interior. Thanks again for watching. So long.